Good morning and welcome. Thank you all for joining us both here in person in DC and by live stream. My name is Brent Chrite, and I'm the 9th president of Bentley University, a business-oriented university located just outside of Boston in Waltham, Massachusetts. It's wonderful to be back in Washington again this year for this important and, we believe, timely discussion. Over the last 4 years, the Bentley-Gallup Business and Society Report has been measuring opinions of Americans about where businesses are bringing positive change, and critical for us, where they're falling short. With 4 years under our belt, this year's survey reveals some surprising changes. Some trends have reversed course, and new insights have emerged. Technology and societal issues are changing so fast that some topics we covered this year simply weren't on the horizon during previous years. Technology and society issues are changing rapidly. And while we covered technology this year, there simply weren't issues of AI and related technology simply weren't in the American consciousness 4 years ago. And so today, these are top of mind. I'm very pleased that we're joined with the expertise across a varied set of sectors, including agriculture, consumer products, and public policy, as well as manufacturing. One thing that leaders in business and government share right now is a concern about how to navigate a volatile global marketplace and an increasingly acrimonious political arena. Just a few years ago, the takeaway messages from our survey were clear. Americans wanted business to stick to business. That no longer appears to be the case. Today, Americans are asking more of companies they buy from or work for. They want businesses to represent American values, jobs, and independence. But that poses an incredibly complicated and difficult dilemma. What does it mean to be a good business in America today? In this politically charged landscape, where even neutrality carries risks, how are business leaders to navigate between patriotism and profits? Perhaps somewhere in that gap, there is a new opportunity for enterprises to thrive. At Bentley, we believe that good business can affect more than just the bottom line, more than just shareholder wealth creation, that it can, in fact, change the world and impact the broader human condition. And conversations like this one today are a unique opportunity to share perspectives from government and policymakers, as well as business leaders, so we can challenge our existing perspectives and learn more from one another. And so I'm eager to begin. First, though, I want to thank our partner, Gallup, who has helped us to learn so much about Americans' expectation of business these last 4 years, so that we're able to now share these thoughts with you. I'm thrilled that CEO John Clifton is here to kick off our discussion. And so please join me in welcoming John to the stage to provide some highlights for this year's Bentley-Gallup Business and Society Report. Thank you.
Thank you, President Chrite, and good morning, and welcome to Gallup, everyone. It's great to have you here. As President Chrite mentioned, this partnership is about one thing, which is understanding what is the the role of business in society. What is it that Americans expect from business here in the United States today? And I want to start because what we're finding is a pretty remarkable, what I think might look contradictory or almost like a paradox. And the first slide is ultimately what got us inspired to why we wanted to do this in the first place. Because Gallup has been tracking now, and this is over the past over 50 years, and we've been asking Americans to see if they have confidence in a number of institutions. We ask things about whether or not they have confidence in the Supreme Court, public schools, the police, but one is big business. And when we first did this in the 1970s, we found that there was a little bit of concern about how people felt about how business in America was being conducted. But at one point, even in the 70s, over a third of Americans actually felt like they had confidence in big business. But over the course of the next 50 years, that number fell to what it is today, which is 15%. Whoops. But that drop means that Americans today have an incredible amount of distrust in American businesses. So, this trend, rightly, inspired Bentley to say, let's figure this out. Let's work with Gallup to see if we can't figure out what's causing this and what is it that businesses can do to fix it. Because if Americans don't trust business, can you effectively do business in the United States or in your community? Now, here's what would look like potentially a contradiction. Because we asked three things. One, what kind of power do you think American business has today? Two, how effective are they in wielding that power? And three, what kind of impact do they make on people's lives? Now, I think the first one that I'm going to show you is not a surprise, because when we ask Americans about that power, almost everyone agrees Americans have a great deal of power in the country today in order to impact people's lives. Then we ask them, how effective do you think business is at influencing that power? You can see here that over the course of our study, 90%, as I mentioned, with a slight rise in Americans saying, I think business is pretty effective at wielding that power. But here's where the story gets almost, I don't know if it's contradictory from the first slide that we showed, that there's this declining, if not totally absent, trust. But the next piece is, what do you think their impact is on people's lives? And again, we've now been doing this for 4 years, and this is what I believe is an utterly remarkable trend. Because when we ask them, do you think it's a positive impact or do you think it's a negative impact? This is what Americans are telling us. They find that now over 60% are saying that they believe the business in America today has a positive impact on their lives. Now again, you might wonder, how is it that Americans would have no confidence in business, yet then over 60% would say, actually, I believe that it's having a positive impact on people's lives. And ultimately, I think what it is that we're uncovering here, and this is something for our panelists to talk about, is that we're looking at the difference between trust and effectiveness. We're looking at the difference between character and competence. What Americans are saying is, I'm not sure I trust your character, but gee, do I think you're competent, and gee, do I think you're delivering. In fact, one of my colleagues said, if you want to see a parallel, look to higher ed. They don't have trust in higher ed. They still like the work product. The same is true across all of business. Now, the next question is, how does that sit among other institutions? Where does business sit among charities, state and local government, or the federal government? Well, we analyzed it. Now, if you look at these four, number one, people feel like they have a great deal of trust in local charities. And secondly, what comes in here, and of course, anytime you go local, about anything we've ever studied, the more local, the more trust people have, state and local government. In third is business, and at the very end is the federal government. Of those four institutions, Americans trust the government the least amount. Now, what would improve how Americans feel about business? We asked them about 8 different things. I'm going to show you them all at once. Now, again, they're in the report. We won't go through all of them. Otherwise, I'll be up here far longer than I was supposed to be. But here are the 8 different things that we asked about. And you can see it's a range of things about, do you think business should positively impact the community? Do you think it should take care of the environment? How about on issues of DEI? How about on CEO pay? And you can see that a number of these issues, you can see that almost every American says, yeah, I think this is a critical thing. And on very few of them do Americans say, I think they're really killing it on this. And I think there are 2, maybe 3 takeaways from this. The first is what Americans demand of business is something that's very human. Something that's make sure that the employee's health care is taken care of. Make sure that you leave the communities in a better place, or make sure everybody's got a fair shot when they show up to the workplace. But another thing is these are things that are ultimately actually in the control of business. So what this is Americans are not necessarily hitting them with a massive critique. It's them expressing that they have a hunger for more. And if businesses can deliver on that, Americans will say, we'll think that you have more than competence. We'll actually start to trust you. Now, this is our analysis at the moment of the role of business in society. But every single year, we also add topical issues, things that are in the news, talked about at the dinner table, talked about on Twitter, social media, and 3 major issues concerning business right now. We wanted to get Americans' opinions on them. And the first one is, what do you think businesses should do around making public stances? This was a huge issue after 2020. Even some employees were asking companies and saying, are we going to take a stand? Are they going to do something about Ukraine and Russia? Are they going to do something about the conflict of Israel and Palestine? So we analyzed it. I think this is so fascinating because now you can actually see that we're building a trend. But when we started asking this, there was a 10-point decline of the American public saying, you know what, I think businesses ought to stay out of these issues. But in the past year, we noticed a remarkable increase. Now a majority of Americans are saying, no, actually, say something. Now again, this doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It doesn't necessarily mean that what businesses should do is take a stance that might conflict with their overall business model, but this is what Americans are thinking. And we broke it down because what we wanted to know is, what do you want them to talk about? And so the issues that we found, they're here, that have a majority support. Remember, we asked more than this. So if you look in the report, you'll see there are a number of issues, like international issues, that don't arrive or don't see a majority support. But you'll see here free speech, climate change, mental health, DEI, and healthcare issues. A majority of Americans say we would like to see Americans speak out, or excuse me, companies speak out on these issues. Now, here's what's most interesting, and I think, again, another topic for our panelists, which is Americans, the general public, wants to see companies speak out on these issues. But who doesn't want to see them speak out? We also broke it by employees, because we find 60% of employees say that they don't want to see the companies that they work for speak out on social issues. This is why it's so critical to examine voices independently from just the American public at large. Again, it's not a suggestion as to what is right or what's wrong. This is simply a matter of what's on the minds of the American public and American employees, or America Inc., for example. So number 1, we asked about public stances. Number 2, we asked about AI. And I think AI perfectly embodies how Americans express their attitudes toward AI, perfectly embodies how they feel about America Inc. in general, because they say, you know, we don't necessarily trust you, but we do think you're competent in this. Because when we asked them, how do you feel about this just in general? And at first you could see Americans were pretty concerned about this. But now watch how it evolves over time concerning AI. This was last year, and this is this year's data. Now, although in absolute terms, Americans are worried that AI will do more harm than good, and we'll show you one of the reasons that they think it's going to do more harm than good. But if you notice the pattern, Americans are warming to the idea of AI, which is, again, a reflection to say, you know what, I'm not sure I trust business with AI right now, but so far I like the product that I'm using, and it is actually helping me in my work and in my life. But so when we ask them about do you trust, you can see 69% go, not really. Institutionally, I'm not giving that blessing just sort of carte blanche. But if you see here down at the end, you can also see that in this great debate about whether or not AI is either going to kill a bunch of jobs, which I guess the CEO of Anthropic believes, or if you're on the side of NVIDIA, that it actually won't kill jobs, the American public is clearly on the side of Anthropic. This is the big thing that they're worried about. This is going to be a massive job killer. The last thing that we covered of the many topical issues that are concerning businesses are tariffs. Now, one of the things that we inquired about with the American public is, what is it that you want to see made right here in America? And we listed a bunch of things, but there is only one that arrives at a majority where they say we want to see food made right here in America. Now, again, it's not to change the fact that 43% want to see their clothes and footwear made right here in the U.S., or their cars right here in the U.S. Again, those large percentages, we wanted to know why. Why do you want those things made here? Three things sort of came to the top. Maybe you could cluster the top two in the first place. American jobs, U.S. economy were the first two. Third, that we don't want to rely on things from a national security perspective. Foreign countries making things that could risk anything from supply chains or if some sort of conflict arose. This is what Americans are concerned about when they say those things. And the last thing, and again, this is why we're sharing this data, having these panels, because we want your thoughts on it. We want your commentary, your questions, because we want to better understand this information. But how do Americans generally feel about tariffs? Well, you can see here, we just asked them point blank, but a majority believe that the tariffs that were put in recently are going to harm the American economy. Now again, George Gallup always said, because one time somebody said to him, well, are you just advocating that when you do a survey, you should just do what people say? He said right back to him, no, I never said that. He said, look, leadership needs to do what's right, but no matter what you do, you need to know what people are thinking. So across the board, on how people feel about business, how they feel about AI, how they feel about companies speaking on social issues, and how the American public feels about tariffs, now we have the information. President Chrite, thank you again for such an incredible partnership, and thank you for helping us put together this research that we honestly got to think will change the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm really delighted to have this chance to engage with my colleagues here on stage. Dennis Rodenbaugh is the president and CEO of the Dairy Farmers of America, which represents a $24 billion organization, which is the world's largest farmer-owned dairy cooperative. The organization's end-to-end operations, from marketing, 25% of the nation's milk supply, to managing 82 manufacturing plants, puts you at the heart of much of what we just heard about in terms of the importance that Americans put on food and groceries and being homegrown. And so we really appreciate you being here. Brian Riley is the CEO of Guardian Bikes, a leading the company's effort to bring bicycle manufacturing back to the U.S. Under his leadership, Guardian has built advanced automated productive facilities in Indiana that combines precision engineering with mission-driven focus on safety, quality, and innovation. And I tell you, it wasn't until we began preparing for this that I came to understand just how popular your products are. Apparently, among young parents with young kids, these bikes are a godsend. And I've learned a lot about what you all are doing, and congratulations to you and your leadership team, and thank you so much for being here. So we have a lot to talk about. It is, as we like to define it, an interesting marketplace right now for those of us at universities that consider it part of our mission to provide the next generation of talent that you all look at. We try to create some sense-making opportunities in this market, and that's what today is. And so I'm going to ask you to help us sort of reconcile some of these contradictions and better understand what we're going through. And so, Dennis, let me start with you. You heard from John, and you've seen in the report, this emergent trend on sort of this patriotic lens through which Americans are putting on products they purchase and businesses that they want to support. The report shows that while Americans value buying U.S.-made goods, the desire for variety and low price and quality still matters. And so I wonder if you can just help us reconcile this push for Made in America branding in a volatile and highly competitive global economic marketplace.
Yeah, I think we struggle with this exact challenge, I think, within our industry, our specific business. Consumers have so many priorities. We all are consumers, and as we go to the grocery store, you see food is one of those things that consumers say, we want to buy that locally in some regards. We want to buy that here in the U.S. In addition to the points that were made as to why, I think there goes the perception, and I think it's valid, of food safety, of food quality. In our industry, we describe dairy as being one of the most heavily regulated foods in the sector. It's heavily tested. It's heavily regulated. You don't see anything. It's a very perishable product, so there's tremendous testing that occurs. So when you look at our model, and we start at the farm, we don't own these dairy farms, they own us. So 10,000 farm families across the U.S. have come together in a cooperative structure. As we look at this trend, and I would say this is a great opportunity for our organization, for our farmers, they've always had this trust. There's always been this halo effect around farming, around dairy, around the food that's produced here in America. And then we aggregate that, I think, into this cooperative structure. Farmers coming together collectively, coordinating their marketing of their product, the testing of their foods, in our case, manufacturing it, as you said, in 82 manufacturing plants across the U.S. So if you think about a phenomenon people really love, they like their farmers market. We're kind of, if you think about this really complex, organized, coordinated farmers market, where dairy farmers are all across the U.S. We manage the logistics of picking up that milk daily from those farms. And I can give you examples of where that's produced, like in Tulare, California. The milk comes from within 20 miles of a plant. It's processed into cheese in that case, and then it's distributed out to consumers. Colorado's a great market. 40 miles on average from farm to a manufacturing plant where it's processed, and within 24 hours, generally, it's on a shelf at a retail store. So when you think of fresh, when you think of local, local doesn't mean necessarily that it has to be small and separated and segregated. It can be coordinated in a cooperative effort. And I think if the cooperative model was new, people would look at it and be in awe. It's been around for hundreds of years, but you'd look at it and say, wow, people with common interests, common needs are coming together to try to find a way of how can we collectively create efficiencies and drive. So I think this has been a great boon, and I think for us, we supply probably 96% of our product is sold here in the U.S. Only about 4% of our product from our company is exported. We feed the U.S. That's this great basis, I think, of the farmers. We get to live their values. We take that halo effect that they have. We take their values, their principles. I have 48 board members that I work for. They're all farmers, some milking 200 cows, some milking thousands of cows. They sit in the boardroom and they say, this is our values. We want to be a part of our community. We want to serve communities, provide nutrition. So I get to live in that space. Our business gets to live in that space. So this trend, this phenomenon is good for our business.
Great, thank you, Dennis. Brian, we've heard the president talk about his commitment to bringing manufacturing back to the U.S. And harnessing American ingenuity and creativity and manufacturing prowess that many think has been displaced. You seem to be hitting on all fronts there. You've got automated manufacturing, you're employing people, you're making a great product. Give us a sense of how you navigate that space of American manufacturing and local business with a deluge of world-class global competitors and pricing arbitrage schemes. How do you maintain your success, and what's driving your commitment to U.S.-based or American manufacturing development?
Sure. So Guardian Bikes is an interesting story because I started the company not initially as a bike company, but with the creation of a new type of braking system for bikes called SureStop. And so I kind of co-created this technology and spent the first 4 or 5 years of the company trying to get the big incumbent bike players to adopt the technology. And I had some success doing that, but what was really interesting about that time is I got to learn how the whole bike industry works. And it's an industry where before Guardian Bikes, it was literally 100% of all bikes sold in the United States were imported. And at that time, it was about 97% of them were coming from China. And so as initially a component supplier, so we had the kind of enabling components that would allow the SureStop braking system, I would go to a company like Schwinn or Huffy or Trek or Specialized, any of the kind of existing brands that you'd heard of, meet with their product managers and try to get our technology adopted onto their bikes. But what was interesting is these companies, while they kind of design and spec a product, they're partnered normally with a big Chinese OEM bike factory to make the product for them. And so as a component supplier, we were always, even though we would get a commitment from a brand, we would always be selling to a big OEM Chinese factory because that factory is responsible for going out and buying all the components, building a bike for the brand, and ultimately kind of selling a bike in a box. So that when you think about Trek or Schwinn, they're buying a fully built bike in a box, importing it into the United States, and then selling that into some kind of retail channel, whether that be a bike shop or mass market retail. So Guardian Bikes was kind of an evolution after 4 or 5 years of trying to work with these brands and really learning how this industry worked and how dominated the supply chain was, and how it just every player in the industry was importing. I started doing Guardian Bikes. The mission from the company from the beginning was always about safety, and this braking system was designed to prevent head over handlebar accidents. I started kind of developing a vision to just make an overall safer bike, and starting with kids' bikes. So we got really focused on making the safest kids' bikes that we could. Initially, we were importing and doing the same kind of model, working with the big Chinese OEM, building the bike there, importing it. And ultimately, I realized that, while we could design a safe product, the real way that we could make a major leap in safety was controlling the manufacturing and controlling how every single bike that leaves our factory is set up, how the brakes are set up, how every bolt is torqued to spec. It's just really hard to control all those variables when the making of the product is happening so far away. And then we also kind of, started to realize that we could build a lot of interesting competitive advantages if we could pull off domestic production, being the only company that is doing it in any of a scaled way in the United States. So as Guardian Bikes has evolved over time, I think the whole reshoring efforts have been driven first by safety, which has always been just the mission of the company from the beginning, is making really safe bikes for people. Second, by the changing macro environment. So you mentioned, President Trump really driving the reshoring conversation. It was interesting because we started thinking about this kind of during the COVID years, during President Trump's first term, and he was talking a lot about reshoring manufacturing then and had started putting some tariffs on China and things like that. But then when Biden came in, he actually didn't roll back nearly any of the tariffs that President Trump started, and he had his whole Build Back Better thing going. And so we kind of realized that, whether it's Republicans in office or Democrats in office, it seems like there is this just underlying trend that's continuing of an interest to reindustrialize the United States and make more things here and have supply chains be more resilient. So it was also an understanding that, we could build a competitive position, being able to do it here and taking the risk to do it here, and maybe the macro policy will follow that. So it wasn't purely because of tariffs, but an understanding that tariffs might stick around long term. And then finally, it's something like a bicycle. It's a simple product, but it's a large product. So if you just think about the cost and even the environmental impact of shipping, there's about 15 million bikes sold every year in the United States. So there's 15 million products that are in a box that's like, this big. There's only about 300 of them that fit in a 40-foot container. So you're talking about tens of thousands of containers making a journey all the way around the world in trucks and trains and ships just to get a bicycle to a consumer. So the whole thought of, can we make a bicycle become a bicycle in the market that it's consumed in a great logistics location, and just cut out all those miles of travel? So really kind of digging into that and thinking about it from first principles, we came to the conclusion that, from a logistics perspective, a supply chain resilience perspective, how well we could serve customers and just cut out all that time and travel, that we could really build an advantage that way, and that's what we've done.
Yeah. No, thank you for that, Brian. I'm going to change gears a bit and stick with you, and then ask the same question to Dennis. You mentioned tariffs, and as we just heard, 53% of Americans suggest that tariffs are bad for the economy, and yet they are widespread and increasingly ubiquitous. The Wall Street Journal this morning had an article about just the huge sums of tariff revenues coming into the country, but it stated that there's a cost to those resources, and based on that cost, from your respective, both of you, your respective industries and your positions, give us your sense on the effectiveness that you believe tariffs have in strengthening and supporting a U.S. manufacturing capacity and U.S. employment. And I want you to answer whether it's worth the potential international fallout, strained economic relations. Is there a better way for us to boost up our own manufacturing capacity, or is tariffs the right response in your point of view?
Yeah, so I think tariffs are a way to kind of, set the playing field and set the incentives. I think they can be a very effective tool to drive reshoring. I think the challenge is some of the ways that tariffs have been executed recently, no business really knows what the tariff environment's going to look like in 3 months from now, 6 months from now. So, something like reshoring manufacturing, for us, it's been, close to a $25 million investment in building a factory and doing all this automation, and it's worked out for us, and it was never really, we never went into it counting on any specific tariff. But as an example, I mentioned that 15 million bikes are sold in a year in the United States. Guardian does about 500,000 bikes. So we're talking like, we're making 3.5% of the bicycles that are sold in the United States, and we're the only major domestic manufacturer. So up to this point, it hasn't been like a huge industry-wide shift of everybody trying to make factories in the United States. I think part of that is, if you can execute tariffs where I'm a big believer if we want to reshore manufacturing, we should do like specific tariffs that are long-term and that ideally are kind of the same across all imports. So that way you're not everybody isn't doing country jumping from one low-cost country to another. And if you want to have an industry where you really want to prioritize domestic manufacturing, set a wall of a certain tariff that applies to all imports and set that in place for a long time, so that all of a sudden companies look at their spreadsheets and they go, okay, even though this is going to take 5 years and maybe tens of millions of dollars, it's gonna pencil out. And so that's what's really challenging, is it takes a long time, and it's always a big investment, and it's always a big risk. And so the understanding what the long-term environment looks like, I think, is the key to really driving a lot of manufacturing here.
Yeah, thank you. Dennis, same question to you. Are there other policies or strategies that you believe ought to be employed to support U.S. job creation, or do you see tariffs as the most effective tool out there?
I don't know if I could say tariffs are the most effective. They're definitely a tool. Tariffs have always been with us. Our industry, and even beyond dairy into broader agriculture, tariffs have always played a major role. Maybe historically there were more of tariffs that were impacting our ability to export U.S. produced goods into other countries. Some of those are monetary tariffs, and some of them are tariffs that are non-monetary, and they're maybe specifically kind of targeted to keep maybe dairy out of Canada, for example, or keep dairy or other agricultural products from being imported into other countries, exports for us. So now we're in this very dynamic and very volatile, as you said, unknown. And this has probably been the most challenging period that we've seen in terms of the unknowns and the volatility as we see country versus countries. How are we moving things around the world? And we have teams that have to overcome that and figure out that. And I do believe the strategy is, and I can't speak to whether it's going to be effective or ineffective, but the strategy is, I think, through some of the uncertainty, is to perhaps put people on their back heel, try to form some form of an agreement that works, and maybe we get this subdued and more fair trade, free open markets, which I think is what we need. If you think about our specific business, we don't have manufacturing. We don't have a significant number of jobs outside of the U.S. Our 19,000 plus employees are all working here in the U.S. across our 82 manufacturing plants primarily, and then across our milk marketing. And that's not including, of course, the jobs and things at the dairy farm level that's separate from our business, but from our ownership in terms of producing that milk. As I said, for us, 96% or so is produced here in the U.S. It stays in the U.S. So it's not being impacted generally by those tariffs. Now, what we do have is products coming in that we compete against. So those products at this point, in some cases, are now being priced at a higher level because of the incoming tariffs. In some cases, that's making creating opportunities. In some cases, creating tremendous challenges when you think of farmers across the U.S. who are growing soybeans and trying to export those, and China has effectively, over the major buyer of soybeans, has cut that off from the U.S., bringing in soybeans from Brazil and other countries, leaving U.S. farmers without a home for their soybeans. So that whole infrastructure, you think about investing, how do we change that? But for us, the primary goal, we produce a product that has value in the form of nutrition. It's not empty calories, it's not wasted calories. It is, how do we bring the best value to consumers for their dollar? And with the protein craze that is out there, people are asking for more and more protein. And our farmers have responded. If you think of a gallon of milk that a farm produces from a cow, That gallon of milk has tremendously much more protein in it today than it did 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago from just management practices, feeding practices, genetics. And so farmers today producing 65% more milk, using 90% less resources in terms of ground and in terms of water. So farmers have been kind of dealing with this ability to compete globally by becoming the most efficient producers of their product on the planet. And that can overcome some of those tariff challenges that we faced globally.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dennis. We heard from John on this topic of AI that 75% of Americans feel that AI is going to have a negative impact on future jobs. And we also heard how two CEOs of NVIDIA and Anthropology, respectively, are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their anticipation of the role of AI. For your industry, in particular, as a more traditional sort of labor-focused industry, how do you anticipate the impact of AI? How does that affect how your farmers are being trained and thinking about the use of data and on securing a sort of competitive edge? What kind of conversations are you having in that with your 45-person board when it comes to AI?
Well, I think that both of those CEOs are right. It's going to be a job killer and a job creator. We're looking at it within our organization, and I believe this is true of any business that at least has vision, any business that's going to be here into the future. That is, you enter into every year with a series of priorities that you then need to cut back because you simply don't have the resources. You simply don't have all the talent you need. So you're operating on this 2-lane highway and you say, okay, I can only do so much this year, given the constraints we have. As our organization, from the cooperative side, from maybe the commercial side, I'll call it, with our 82 manufacturing plants, with our teams that are marketing milk, with the logistics of moving milk 150 million miles a year from farm to manufacturing plants, and then roughly that same number of miles from manufacturing plants to 15,000 retail locations on a daily basis around the U.S. and some globally. AI is going to allow us to turn maybe that 2-lane highway into what I hope is going to be a 10, 12, 14, 16-lane highway where we can have more priorities, and those priorities are going to need more talent and more people and more things that can allow us to drive forward. And that, in turn, I think is going to create jobs and create opportunities and expand what we can offer consumers and how we can offer it. So we're big proponents on that. Now, at the farm level, the farmers themselves have always been great at adopting technology. They've always been early adopters. Whether it is telemetrics, where you're going to put this on your tractor, the tractor's now going to auto steer. It's going to determine where do I need to put the fertilizer, where do I need to most efficiently do that. So they've been early adopters. It's where they've gotten their efficiencies, their optimization, and then we run off of that, and we're working now using AI, and I still believe that's a little bit of a misnomer. I don't believe AI yet exists. I think we've got some tremendous technology, and character recognition and pattern recognition and all that. I don't think we're quite yet to what I would call true artificial intelligence. But from a technical sense and what it can do for us, it is enhancing our capabilities. And I look at this as it's going to be a people-focused approach enhanced with technology so that each one of us can do more on a daily basis. I don't think it's a matter of, and I think I was told this back when I was a student, that with the advent of computers and with communications, we're all just going to have this great leisurely life. They told me when I was an adult, I'd only have to work maybe a day or two a week. Because computers were going to make life so efficient. There just wasn't going to be anything left to do. Well, that turned out to be completely false. Right? I mean, think of your laptop, think of your iPhone, think of your iPad, whatever device it is. Who gets to shut off and shut down anymore? We don't get to come home and just relax and say, oh, great, we got technology. No, we're all doing more, we're performing more, we're on more, and I'm afraid, this is the downside, I don't think AI is going to fix that for us. I think AI is going to make us on more and connected more. So that's the good and the bad. That's why I think they're both right.
Thank you. Brian, how about you? How do you and how does your leadership team think about its capacity to harness, leverage AI in your manufacturing and distribution process? And you think about supply chain issues. What's that look like?
Yeah, I agree that it's going to shift a lot of jobs. The nature of a lot of certain jobs will change in the age of AI. But I'm very much on the side that, in aggregate, it won't destroy a bunch of jobs, and it'll just make people and companies a lot more productive. And so I've been on the front lines of that, just growing our business. We're a newer business, but we've grown tremendously in a pretty short period of time. And a lot of what's enabled that are a lot of different AI tools. And so everything from our businesses, we've been able to grow as big as we are being completely direct to consumer. So every single Guardian bike is sold on guardianbikes.com. Nobody thought that was possible even several years ago, that you'd ever be able to sell that many bikes online. But to give an example, I mean, the way that we reach customers is through Instagram and YouTube and Google and TikTok, and all of these platforms are driven by increasingly advanced AI algorithms that are really good at getting in front of people who are maybe interested in buying a bike. And so that's an example where just the nature of innovation in AI on the marketing side enables us, a company like us, to not have to go to Walmart to sell a bunch of bikes, but be able to speak directly to millions of people that might be interested in buying a bike and reach them that way. When you look at manufacturing, a lot of the reason why we've been able to pull off US manufacturing and make bikes here and do it in a competitive way is using a lot of advanced automation. Still have about 400 people working in our plant, making about 500,000 bikes a year, but just wouldn't be able to do it without using certain automation. So, pretty advanced automated welding, really advanced laser cutting of tubes and things like that. A lot of the underlying technology of how you program those things and how you figure out laser paths, and even our own team just figuring out how to work with these machines. I mean, when we got automated welding set up, we had a team of guys just sitting around with ChatGPT asking a bunch of questions on how we could make the welds better and how we could change weld parameters, and actually like loading pictures of the welds and saying, look at this, and what do you think we can change? So just, these are examples of just that added productivity for us has just created a lot of economic opportunity, a lot of jobs, a great product for customers, a way to reach, hundreds of thousands of customers that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to. So I think as the AI wave continues, we'll see just big productivity unlocks across all kinds of different dimensions that enables both people and companies to be that much more productive. And I think what that ends up looking like is basically a more productive economy with just as many jobs and hopefully better, higher paying jobs. And so it's really, learning how to use these tools and leveraging them to be more productive is the best way to think about AI and adding productivity instead of necessarily being really worried about a huge wave of job destruction.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. I want to pivot to this issue of trust and transparency. You may recall from the data, John talked about 43% of Americans trust business in society to serve society. There is a trend of the last few years that institutions in general have had a decline in trust and public goodwill. For the federal government, that decline has been precipitous. But we've seen it in universities, we've seen it in large corporations, we've seen it across society. And so, Brian, as a business leader, as a company CEO, give us a sense of one, the extent to which you believe your organization has an obligation to a broader societal impact, which, I mean, Adam Smith would basically, or Milton Friedman would say, this is just a tax on the firm. Anything that takes attention away from shareholder wealth creation is a tax on the firm. And yet we talk a lot about obligation to society beyond shareholders. If you believe that that's important, what does that look like for you? And how do you go about rebuilding or sustaining a level of trust that seems to have diminished over the last few years?
Yeah, I think, like Guardian Bikes is an interesting story of where we've tried to, the best we can, align those two things so that it's a win-win. I don't think that, societal contribution or patriotism and profits necessarily have to be at odds with each other. Sometimes they are, but where you can make those two things work together. In our case, building a factory here, building bikes in the United States is something that people thought was impossible. But for us, it's been a profitable outcome. It's been something that helps fuel the economic engine of the company, and we've been growing and continue to grow and continue to reinvest in the company. And all the while been, affecting our community of Seymour, Indiana, with hundreds of jobs, starting to build suppliers of components and things like that in the United States that haven't existed in the United States before. So we've been really, the challenge in business is you can't really make a societal impact unless you have an economic engine that works. Because as soon as it doesn't work, the business starts to fall apart and opportunities are lost, and you kind of dwindle into a slow death. But if you've got an economic model that works, that can be aligned with something that you believe as a business will also make a greater contribution to society. In our case, just trying to make a great, safe product, and now really affecting local communities at the same time. And again, like, it's not really even a partisan thing. It's now a 10-year thing of multiple presidents talking about how important it is to rebuild some manufacturing capability in the United States and to be more resilient and not as dependent on foreign supply chains. And so this is an industry that was completely dependent on foreign supply chain. And so, we always have that in the back of our head, like, are we making a important contribution to the country and society while we're trying to make a profit? And we've really tried to think about how to align those two things so you can do the same things at the same time. And that's a great thing when you can figure it out. And it just fuels everybody that works for the company as well, because everybody just feels like they're part of a great organization that's making a great impact.
Yeah. Dennis, Brian just sort of paraphrased this sort of axiom of no margin, no mission, right? And your job is to ensure the health and vitality and the competitiveness of dairy farmers, and we've seen a rapid increase in sustained increase in productivity, and I would assume margins, and I wonder if that is how you all view your obligation to sort of serve society more broadly, or if in fact you believe that's even important, or is that just a byproduct of being a successful organization? How do you reconcile the need for profits and margins with a less maybe defined commitment to society?
Yeah, I think you kind of mentioned Adam Smith and the invisible hand, and I tend to kind of believe businesses do have, with the exception of maybe moments of corruption and challenges of human nature, but generally businesses do end up performing to a societal good. They're creating jobs, they're creating business. For us, and you see in some of your survey material in the Gallup polls, the trust occurs because it's local. That's where the greatest trust is when it's local. And our business is structured around a little more of a local phenomenon based upon the ownership of our organization. You think of 10,000 farm families living in their communities. They're stewards on the ground that they're working on. They're drinking the same water as their neighbors. They're breathing the same air as their neighbors. They're contributing to their communities. They're volunteering at their schools, at their hospitals. They're doing like we would all do in each one of our communities. And that locality and those values that they bring, and they've kind of got this what I call this great purpose. They get to live this life that they feel they were kind of created for. This is what our purpose is to work this farm, to be stewards of all that was put under their care. And then over on this other end is the consumer here in the U.S. and the consumer around the globe that they really connect with. And they say, this is who we now have to serve with nutrition, to ensure that people are healthy, that they have access to affordable nutrition. And in between that, they've placed us. They invested into this business and said, help us get from here to here with the consumers. So you mentioned in the introduction, we're roughly a $25 billion company in terms of sales. We're an extremely thin company when it comes to profitability, by definition. That's our charter. When I have my 48 board members in a room, yes, we go through the financials of the business that I'm responsible for. But more important to them, every single meeting is not what we made in terms of profitability, but how did we serve these two constituencies? The farmers, and you think of our revenue, 99%, 99 cents out of every dollar flows one of two directions: backwards to the farm or forward out to an affordable source of nutrition for consumers. We operate on effectively 1% margin. No business really can sustain itself typically under that, but the cooperative model allows us to do that because our farmers, and we're not subject to, and I'm not putting down publicly traded companies, I think they're essential. That capital resource is required. It's just not something we're subject to. And so our farmers, they don't look at quarter to quarter. And sometimes I think they even care too little about our performance. They care too little almost whether I would even come in and maybe I'd have a loss year. I haven't yet, but what if I did? Would that be okay? And they would say, yeah, that's okay. As long as we are performing our broader purpose and our goal of ensuring that we have a market for milk for our members, and we're sustaining that, and we're getting product to consumers. So they look at generationally. They don't look quarter to quarter. We make investments from a generation. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the assets that they own. They're spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the assets they own, all for this great purpose. And there are years where they don't make a profit. And sometimes they don't make a profit for years at a time. Imagine coming to work every single day, not just saying I don't get a paycheck, I'm losing net worth every day I come to work. And I've been a dairy farmer, and I've done that, and you're going backwards, and you keep going.
Right. Thank you. We are almost out of time. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I still got lots of questions here, but I do want to ask one other. So you got 1 minute to summarize for us what responsible leadership in today's environment means to you, Brian.
Yeah, I think a bit what I alluded to before, in business and in business leadership, you're trying to serve a customer, you're trying to make a great product or service for people, and ultimately you're measured by how good you are at delivering that. And if you can do that really efficiently and profitably, you can sustain, you can grow an organization over time, you can grow, you can reinvest. But you also operate within a greater system. So you're operating within a town, a county, a state, a country. And you do need to be aware of the system that you operate in. All of us business leaders, we operate in this kind of construct of a country and a system and a government and a system that's capitalism. and it all kind of breaks down if that system, breaks down. So you do share a responsibility of being in a community and in this kind of system that you operate in. And what I alluded to before is just trying to align those things and say, like, as a business leader, am I making an impact for people? Am I making an impact for the country that I live in? And am I making an impact in the community that both, myself and our employees live in and our partners live in? And so trying to align those things as best as you can, I think the more businesses can do that, the more everybody benefits. And when those things get way out of alignment is when you tend to have kind of businesses doing weird things and Americans losing trust in businesses and all those kinds of things. So responsible leadership to me is just trying to think of all the stakeholders in that line and try to create a company that rolls up and serves all those things at the same time.
Thank you. Then the same question. 60 seconds.
I'd say understand your purpose, have a vision for how you're going to achieve it, and then you have to do it. Don't look to the government to solve the problem for you. Don't look to somebody else who's going to come in. Don't talk about how you tried and how I gave effort and how it is. We are going to have to achieve, and we're going to have to deliver, and you do it with integrity. You do it, you keep your word, you keep your commitment. We live that every day. It gets hard. Everything is hard. I think too often people are looking for, well, it's somebody else needs to do this. Somebody else needs to take accountability. We're going to be asking a question in front of our team here in the next few months of who is most responsible for protecting and safeguarding our culture of integrity, of community, of values. And I'm hoping that the answer across our 19,000 employees, or there will actually be about 600 at this event, would be pointing to themselves and saying, I am. Each one of us is. And I think that's part of the lead. Every one of those levels of leadership, we are responsible for that. So I think we too often turn to others and say, do it for me.
Thank you. We're going to have time for a Q&A later, but after this fireside chat. But for now, please join me in thanking our panelists for a great presentation. I'd now like to bring Jonathan Rothwell to the stage. We'll have a bit more of an intimate conversation here. I'm really delighted to welcome Jonathan. He is the Gallup's principal economist, a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, and leads the research on labor markets, inequality and discrimination, entrepreneurship, and well-being. He is the author of A Republic of Equals from the Princeton University Press, published in 2019, and has published extensively on U.S. productivity, trade, and systematic discrimination. Jonathan, welcome and thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We appreciate this opportunity. So you think and work and write extensively on issues of patriotism and productivity. And I'd ask you to help, if you can, level set for us how we reconcile notions of inequity and patriotism and opportunity in an environment where the discourse around some of these topics is increasingly skewed and opaque. So what are our opportunities as a society and as business and academic leaders, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, well, thanks for that question. So I think this was a big topic of the book I wrote in 2019. When it comes down to it, to have a well-functioning, just society, we have to give everybody an opportunity to compete. We have to give everybody an opportunity to have the public resources they need to participate fully in markets. And when I think about what businesses can do to be truly patriotic, to me it's about, with respect to how they treat their employees and so on, it's really about rewarding their productivity, giving them an opportunity to rise based on their own contributions. And when it comes down to it, it's recognizing merit and rewarding merit. And I think that's the most patriotic thing that businesses can do. And that means not discriminating, obviously, and not being focused on the identities of the employees, their political ideas, obviously the race, religion, gender, and really giving them an opportunity to thrive in the workplace and reward them when they do.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm reminded, I've always believed that, one of the cornerstones of America is opportunity and fairness. And for many of us, that is sort of self-evident in that it's a society that celebrates failure and we can always reinvent ourselves, and there are just tremendous opportunities in this country that arguably don't exist this way in other countries. But I wonder if you can address this issue of meritocracy and egalitarianism, which is talked about pretty extensively with our public sector leaders today. And I just, based on your research and what you've discovered, give us a sense of how those two notions collide with reality at this stage in the evolution of this country. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, there has been a lot of debate on that, and there's one perspective that meritocracy is an illusory goal that is basically just sort of clouding efforts to hoard power and resources and so on. That's not the view that I hold. I think it is a very much a worthy goal, and it was, I think, in many ways a goal of the founders of the country. Obviously, there are some real limitations to the extent that we had a meritocracy at the beginning and throughout our history. You could say we made great progress from where this sort of society they were coming from, a feudal society with a monarchy, with lords and serfs, is obviously not a meritocracy. England was, those things were starting to break down in England during the Industrial Revolution. And that is what really launched the boom in human progress and technology that continues to this day. And the United States took a step forward in that respect. And then, as we revised our Constitution and we opened up more opportunities and we made a more meritocratic society. And I think if you look today, compared to, one thing I've looked at is kind of the history of discrimination and over the course of the United States going back 100 years. And we've got great data from Gallup as well as from other sources that show to what extent people were openly advocating and would sort of endorse discriminatory policies in hiring and access to jobs, as well as every aspect of life you can imagine, whether it was marriage partners, who you're willing to do business with. The discriminatory attitudes in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and 50s, and so on, were extremely high. There's no way you could say we had a meritocratic society with respect to African Americans specifically, but other groups as well face some significant barriers. That has changed dramatically over the last 70 years, and now the Supreme Court is worried about discrimination against Asian and white students in higher education, and just had a ruling that that's no longer going to be allowed. And I think we've kind of come really to a pretty profound moment where there's a recognition increasingly that discrimination of any kind is no longer acceptable. And we're going to make sure that kids have equal access to good schools. We've got universal pre-K in many cities and states, including here in DC. And I think we're arriving at a point where we will truly have an equal playing field. And I think that a lot of people say, well, won't that create inequality because people have different talents and dispositions and so on? And it will to some extent, but the kind of extreme income inequality that we've seen here in the United States a little bit, but also in other places around the world, is not really driven by equal opportunity. You don't see extreme income inequality when there's equal opportunity. When you get that extreme income inequality, it's really because industry associations and leaders have tilted the playing field to their own advantage. And you see that to some extent in the United States. You look at the occupations that are actually the highest earning occupations. It's lawyers and doctors. It's not CEOs. And the reason it's lawyers and doctors, I think, is because there are very clear rules and regulations about competing with lawyers and doctors. You can't hire somebody to represent you in court unless they have a JD, unless they've gone through certain things. You can't get medical advice from people unless they have these certain certifications and so on. And it's in some states you can't have a nurse practitioner give you a prescription. In other states they're more lax about it. But anyway, the point is that competition has been distorted, not just in those groups. I don't mean to pick on those groups. But even more so in countries where there's, say, a dictatorship and there's an industry that the dictator is particularly close with, creating opportunities for excess profits and so on. When you have competition, those excess profits go away. Workers are paid based on their productivity, and you see fairly equal, not equal, we're not talking about an ideal sort of socialist state, but you see market forces generate competitive, equitable outcomes.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. It's really fascinating to me, and I am reflecting on some of the work that you've done on well-being and the lifelong effects of parenting and social conditions with what you just talked about in terms of our commitment as a society to ensure a level playing field and as such to treat people based on their merits and ability. But I want to just ask you, because it's a rare opportunity to have this conversation with someone like you. If you look at the policies historically of D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, and what was, and arguably, in my opinion, just a huge and costly and inappropriate shift to the left, was nonetheless based on the perceptions, in many ways documented, that it hasn't been a playing field that's been level. And that when people enter situations from a different point in that playing field with different needs and deficits, that institutions then had an obligation to help individuals overcome those deficits, hence the trouble that we've seen. And so I would ask you to help us think about in 2025, with all of the amazing progress that's been made, one could argue, I think, without being unreasonable, that if you look at the LGBTQ communities and other marginalized communities, that if it is a level playing field, they certainly don't feel as it is. And so how does that help shape your view of what
our obligation, if any, ought to be to ensure opportunity and access?
Those are difficult questions. But let me say, I'll take a stab. So, you know, there's obviously, every company has its own culture, and you know, it's here at Gallup. I'm very happy to be in a corporate culture that I love as an employee for several reasons. One, people are selected based on objective criteria, like how they score on selection exams, you could say, structured interviews, and so on. And you know, our resumes matter, and so on. There's other judgments that go into it. But basically, you don't get hired at Gallup if you don't perform well on these structured interviews that our Gallup scientists have developed over the years. So I feel confident, and those are tested, by the way. They're frequently tested again for bias against any kind of group you can imagine, and there isn't any. So I feel confident that people have the opportunity to work here. If people aren't represented here, it's because they haven't applied. And so, you know, there's brand issues that, you know, we want to make sure that every company wants to make sure that a brand that is open to people from all different backgrounds and so on. But then the other aspect that I love about being at Gallup is the focus on both strengths and employee engagement. So, you know, with Clifton Strengths, we all take these kind of personality tests that tell us what we're best at, and there's the way that is applied that I enjoy so much is that I get to work on the things every day that I'm best at. And nobody asked me to, for example, be a project manager. I would be a terrible project manager. I wouldn't be engaged in that. I get to work on research. I get to write books. I get to publish academic articles. I get to write blogs. I spend probably half my day looking at working with data every day, and I actually enjoy that, which is, you know, most of you probably think that's kind of weird, but that's what I like doing. And so I don't have to go to a lot of meetings. I don't have to, you know, follow up with emails with large groups of people and so on. There are people that do that for me, and thank goodness I have them. I get to focus on what I do best. And so that's the culture here at Gallup. We try to identify where people's strengths are and let them do those and let them fulfill their sort of mission, their talents. And at the same time, we measure to what extent they're engaged, and if there's a problem, you have a conversation with your go-to, your manager, and you sort it out. So I think with that kind of culture, anybody can thrive here, and if there's a problem, you kind of talk it out with your colleagues. And so it's not like, you know, it's impossible for people to feel like they don't belong, but it really shouldn't happen. Right. Kind of structurally, we've taken steps to make sure that doesn't really happen. And I think that's happening in a lot of companies around the country. And if, you know, to the extent that people are feeling like they're not belonging at work, then, you know, raises issues about, well, who are they working for, and who are their managers, and so on. I think when it comes to some of the political issues, obviously, sometimes those can kind of bleed over. There's a lot of, you know, every time you read the newspaper, there's going to be issues about identity politics that are being discussed, and some people want to discuss those at work, and some people don't. And it kind of goes back to what we saw in the polls about, you know, consumers wanting companies to take positions, but really what they really want is companies to take positions that favor their own views, and they don't want companies to take positions that go against them.
Right.
So and I think that it's kind of the same as with your managers and bosses at work. Some people who are very passionate about political issues will bring that identity to work, and they'll say, I want my manager, my boss, to take XYZ action to recognize this public event that happened in the news yesterday. Right. But if they do that, then they're going to offend the 2/3 of the employees that are on the other side of that issue, because we know that a third is Republican, third's independent, third's Democrat, and so it does put managers in a difficult position, and bosses. But I do think if they, you know, kind of goes back to the focus on individual strengths, why they're here, what the mission of the company is, you can navigate some of those things.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. And I would assert that Gallup sets a very high standard for how it leads and engages, and I wish more companies would adapt those expectations. Just in the brief time we have left, I think the issue that is on my mind is, you alluded to it, is that the political narrative, much of what we're hearing, does seem to be affecting how companies are managed. Despite maybe the proclivities or expectations of the leaders, they're hearing what's going on out there, and they seem to sometimes be influenced by that. And so perhaps you don't consider yourself an advisor to policymakers, but I think if policymakers were wise, they would read your writings. And so if you were sort of policy czar, and if you had the chance to get in front of dozens of policymakers, how might you talk to them about how to consider issues of, again, I want to go back to what you write about, well-being and social conditions. How might we do a better job with our political leaders in thinking critically and deeply about the multifaceted issues that define how kids are raised and how they're impacted and how they're prepared to be meaningful, contributing members of our society? Because I don't hear a lot of thoughtful debate about that, and I just wonder what you might communicate to policymakers shaping that.
Well, thanks for that question. So I'm working on a book right now on youth well-being and the kind of the fundamentals of youth well-being. And the thing that I've learned after a few years of research on this, including running our own surveys, is really parenting is the most important lifelong determinant of well-being and the quality of parent-child relationships. And what's really striking to me, from kind of like I used to work at the Brookings Institution before I was here, and now I'm a non-resident senior fellow, and now I'm still immersed in public policy debates, is that is so far off the radar of think tanks and policy debates. Everything is about socioeconomic status. You read public health reports, you go to WHO websites, CDC websites. You'd think that the income of your parents is the only thing that matters to whether you feel happy as a teenager. And you actually look at the data, and it has almost zero effect. I mean, it's kind of laughable, the distance between the public discourse on this and the reality. And it's pervasive. It's the quality. It starts with parent-child relationships, but then as you go through life, it's the quality of all of your relationships. So including your relationships with colleagues at work. And so what we see even in our measures of job evaluation and how satisfied people are at work and so on, it matters so much more that you feel that you have meaning and purpose at work, that you're getting along with your colleagues, that you're feeling engaged, that you're using your strengths, so much more than your actual compensation. And yet the focus on everything is on how much are you paid, what's the minimum wage set at, what are the quality of benefits and so on. I'm not saying benefits and pay don't matter. They certainly do. Right. But they have such exaggerated importance, and especially when it comes to youth well-being. And so I want to say I'm a parent of 4, so I'm one of the best customers of our previous guests here. I mean, I'm buying milk 3-4 times a week. I'm buying gallons of milk.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
Huge milk drinking family. And I bought a Guardian bike for my daughter 2 years ago. We love it. It's a great bike. We're a big biking family. I biked here today.
Yeah, and they probably drink a lot of milk too.
They drink tons of milk. Yeah. So it's perfect. Yeah. But those are the kind of things that drive well-being. It's not, my income is not the thing that makes my kids happy. It's they have a chance to bike around the communities. It's safe. It's fun. We do fun things together. They feel loved. and I try to create a well-structured, demanding household so they know what the rules are, so that they move away from just thinking about themselves and they think about other people. I mean, that's what every kid needs to go through, that evolution. You need parents to teach them. So that's what I would tell policymakers.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. This has been such a treat for me. John, thank you for what an opportunity. Thank you to our amazing panelists. So grateful, Jonathan. And I think we have some time now for questions for Brian and Dennis and Jonathan. So I think there's some mics around here for anything that might be on your minds. Back here.
One, two. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that last. Testing 1, 2, 3. All right, bingo. I'm a technology guy, 43 years, and here I am hitting the wrong button on the microphone. Sorry about that. And that last question was the one that resonated with me the most. I didn't hear one topic mentioned today that was very important. I think it's the number one topic of our generation. Did anyone see the movie The Life of Chuck? No one. Okay, at the beginning of the movie, the internet is crashing, California's falling into the ocean, and there's a teacher in the classroom trying to maintain normalcy, teaching elementary school students. I'm a retired IBM employee of 43 years, now a substitute teacher, and I was encouraged Monday. I was in the classroom with fifth graders, and they were talking about Chesapeake watershed issues, the Chesapeake Bay watershed issues, and the kids came up with some incredible creative solutions. I was encouraged. We're talking about global warming, and I didn't hear that mentioned today. Number one issue, I believe, of our generation. We are negligent by not talking about it more and being distracted with ineffective leadership in government and in business. So my question is for each of the panelists today is, if you have the opportunity to go in front of Congress with suggestion, policy change that you believe would positively impact the number one issue, global warming, and why this policy would be helpful to your industry, your community, and the world.
I don't know, I'm not like a super policy guy, but I have a perspective that a lot of people I think don't think about as it relates to making more of the things that we consume in the markets that we consume them in. So bicycles are an example, and I mentioned this when I was up there, but there's only about 300 bikes that fit in a 40-foot container. And these 40-foot containers that make this journey all the way across the globe to get to us, each container journey is about as much carbon emissions as a small passenger vehicle emits in a whole year. So if you think about all the things that we buy that are imported from really, really, really far distances, it's actually a huge environmental impact. And container ships specifically are burning like some of the dirtiest diesel fuel, and they're huge emitters. And so when you look at the emission scope across all these different things, that's one of the biggest ones. So it's something a lot of people don't think about when they think about manufacturing on shore, but I've seen it firsthand. You know, every day we're making a bike become a bike in Indiana, and it's a very short distance from Indiana to most of the U.S. population. And so you just cut out all of those emissions, but it's not something that I think companies normally talk about or people normally think about. But I think it's actually a big benefit of a continued push to make more things on shore. So anyway, just a perspective on the environmental impact.
Okay, I think we got time for one more quick one over here, and then we're going to have to, out of respect for your time.
Hi, I am here representing a place called Dog Tag, which is a bakery in Georgetown, but we use our bakery like a living business school to serve the military community in transition. So my question is about marketing and the choices you've made in marketing your products. Brian specifically, I think, right? Like you have some larger objectives you want to achieve. How much has your marketing focused on talking about your social impact and the objectives you want to achieve versus just market a great product and people will buy it and then you'll have the income you need to like achieve those larger objectives?
Yeah, it's interesting because we're so digitally focused on our marketing that we get pretty good real-time data in terms of what's working and what's resonating with consumers and what doesn't work. And the thing that really works for us is just talking about the benefits of the product. But what's interesting is that once you convince a customer to do business with you because you've got a great product and they're going to get, immediate benefits from it, and they sort of, join the brand as a customer and maybe, look at doing business with you again, over time you kind of grow that relationship, and now they start to understand. They may not even known that the bike was made in the U.S. when they bought it, for example, but they come to learn that. They get the package and it says made in the USA, or they read a couple emails that we follow up with and things like that. And so you grow that relationship over time, and then you really deepen that connection with the customer, and they can identify, who they're doing business with, and they do start to care about those things. So for us, we sell kids bikes, so we get a chance to do business with a customer when their kid is 4 or 5 years old and they outgrow the bike, in a few years, and so they have a choice again of who to do business with for the next bike. And so really where that alignment with the brand and our values come in is driving that repeat purchase behavior and keeping people doing business with us over a long period of time. But we tend to kind of entice them and get their attention when we're talking about how Guardian bikes are the easiest bikes to learn how to ride on, or how they're really safe, and talking to those benefits that benefit them right then.
Yeah. So product first, and then sort of start to introduce your other motives as you build that relationship.
Yep, exactly.
Thank you.
I want to thank you all. We're a bit out of time. My apologies. Please join me again in just thanking our amazing panelists here. Appreciate you all being here.